Okay, here we are with Milos Raonic. Uh, First question: how's your health? Shoulder, knee? Are you training? What's the deal?
Yeah, I'm back into it. I've been back into it about eight. This is day 8 or 9. It's been nice to be back into it. If, I think the knee and kind of what happened after Wimbledon was getting hurt on the shoulder and then trying to compensate to find a way. And I think just getting ready for Wimbledon was tough in a lot of ways. Got hurt that first match in Hertogenbosch. Didn't really know it until after the second match. It was kind of a blessing to have 2 days in between, but something felt like it was missing in that second round match. And then I went to try to get ready for Queens, and that was kind of impossible. Took a few days off, tried to warm up the day of my match in Queens. I wasn't even close. Then you lose a lot of days trying to get MRIs, ultrasounds, figure out what the issue is. I realized I had in a small muscle in my rotator cuff, I had a tear. So I got treatment for that. And I was kind of put on the protocol of like, you shouldn't do anything 8 to 10 days, which was kind of most of the time. If I had been playing on clay or played a lot of matches throughout a year, you'd be like, okay, I can manage that. But obviously after, not playing a match for 2 years, I kept hitting. I wanted to hit lightly. I just didn't really serve till the day before my first round. I really went kind of against my guys because they didn't want me to play. For me, I was already there. I put in the time. I just wanted to go out and see what I could make of it. And I thought I did a pretty good job in making it count. I was I was a bit unfortunate to have a rain delay. I think maybe I could have done a bit better. Would have changed anything? I don't believe so. But if I had that day off in between, but getting a rain delay, playing back to back, kind of made things almost impossible. But since then, because I knew that I wasn't going to really play Washington, I knew that doing 3 weeks in a row felt impossible for me. And I've always done quite well in Cincinnati as well. So I really wanted to focus on Toronto and Cincinnati rather than the option of like a Washington Toronto thing. I knew I'd have time. So I really took the days off post Wimbledon, got that healed. Once I was good and in the clear, started training, been feeling very good. And, excited in a couple days to head up to Toronto and get into that whole thing and see my family. It's been a long time, and I'm sure I'll feel the pressures and the stresses of it all too. But I'll try to enjoy it as much as I can.
You unfortunately have plenty of experience in your career coming back from an injury layoff and then revving up the machine like you had almost never been away. But this was sort of next level. Physical woes aside, I mean, you look great out there. You moved well. Your backhand was solid. Is that a fair assessment of the tennis part of it?
Yeah, the one thing I guess I always saw it as two issues that would be coming back. Um, the physical issue of getting healthy, staying healthy, and being able to move at a certain speed and these kind of things. And then the other issue was going to kind of be the tennis. Can I still play a certain level? Luckily for me, even when I started and I would only hit like 3, 4 days at a time and something would start hurting and I'd need to stop maybe for like another week and then try to start up again. Um, the tennis came back pretty quickly. So I knew that the feel for the ball and these kind of things, and I could always kind of hit my spots on the serve. And luckily for me, compared to most players that have kind of this last 2 years been coming on kind of their comebacks from like serious injuries, a lot of things depend on me. If I can hit my spots on my serve, at least I can take care of half of the match and then try to figure out the other half on the return games. So I knew I just had to try to figure out the physical thing. I was obviously surprised as well by how well I was able to start off right away. I thought, it would be not that kind of a positive start. I was really preparing myself for something else. And there was a lot of doubts about it as well. Not that could I play that level, but could I make it translate to a match? Because I was feeling it in practice and stuff. And it was a positive surprise with things. And a lot of the things went extremely well as I could have hoped. Little things come up, but those things are always going to be around. And I've always been good at managing those things. I just didn't know if I'd be good at managing it 2 years after. That was kind of another
Next level.
thing. And then next level, and then there's also two layers to it. There's a difference between playing one good match and there's, in tennis you have to play back-to-back days, and that I still have to figure out. So I hope that can come as well, because my goal isn't to like come back to tournament, hopefully win one match and then kind of call it the next day. That's far away from what I would consider successful.
Did it feel different being on tour, being in the locker rooms? Were there guys that you ran by that you had literally never seen in your entire life?
Yeah, definitely that I hadn't seen in person. Like, perfect example was I'd never met Carlos in person, Alcaraz. That's pretty nuts considering the guy is already number one in the world at this point. And I was able to watch him a lot and stuff, but there's a lot of those kind of things that I didn't really see in person. I don't think I ever crossed paths with Holger as well. Like, and we're talking about two guys in the top 10. So there's a lot of other categories of people I never crossed with as well. So that was new. But I thought some things about the tennis world don't change. I think it's really people trying to make the most of each opportunity they can, and the routines. For me, the toughest thing after 2 years, which was kind of silly that I actually was dealing with it, like if you think about it, but it was kind of also not a crazy expectation or like a crazy surprise at it. I would have to like really think like, how many rackets do I get strung for matches? Especially there was a difference between Hertogenbosch and then what I would get strung for a match in Wimbledon. And I actually had to rely a lot of the time on other people, because I asked my stringers, I'm like, what would I get before? And they would kind of remind me, because, their whole thing is about that one thing. Whereas I'm trying to figure out like, how many t-shirts do I take today when it's hot? Because Hertogenbosch was more hot, for 2 years, not even, but less shorter. When every single time I play, I wouldn't think about once how many shirts I had. You kind of wear the shirt you have until, if you forget that day, you just keep doing the same thing. How many bottles I had to take to a match, all these kind of things. I never thought I would forget those things, but you kind of lose the instinct and the routine of like, how much earlier before a match do I like to warm up, all these kind of things. You always have a little bit of a second guessing. Are you doing like the best things that work for you, or that like worked for you before? That was kind of the biggest surprise to me, because that was all within myself, that I never thought that those things would kind of, the natural instinct for those things would kind of go away.
So it's like riding a bike, but the bike is bigger or smaller, or the road is narrower, and even though you still know how to do it, but it's not like you ever took notes about what you do.
You just kind of have to, like, things that come naturally, you just have to ask yourself, did I used to do this or not? And how did I used to do it? And like, it's a split second thing, but you end up going through these things like 2-3 times every single decision you're making, which is kind of absurd. But especially myself, who's very routine based, like, some players, you see their routine like Nadal on court with everything. Me, I would say most of the things happen away from the court, but I still have my things, and those routines just weren't put in practice for 2 years. And it's crazy that they can kind of go away, and they take some conscious effort when you try to get them back.
Your relationship with the sport, at least from the outside, has always seemed, I don't want to say mercenary, but maybe transactional. And yet in that interview that you did on TSN after your loss at Wimbledon, you seemed wistful, like emotional about it, talking about, being a kid and loving a game so much you get obsessed by it every waking minute. Has that always been there, and maybe you didn't process it or verbalize it, or given what's happened in your life, have things changed?
No, I think it's always been there. I think for me, it's just the way I always saw it is, to do the best I can, I need to do things a certain way. I'm not really driven by emotion on many decisions I make and so forth. It's always, does it make sense? Is it logical? And I think it takes a lot for me, for like the emotional aspect to creep through. And I think that's kind of the difference there, is you get a lot of these things and also towards the end, when I'm finishing Wimbledon, I'm actually able to step away from it. I think it was almost impossible to see it before, because you're just like so caught up in what's next. And then towards the end of the tournament, you're kind of like, okay, now I can relax, and it kind of comes out a bit. But it really does take a lot to get me there. Like, I'm not the kind of person that swells up about many things at all.
Your personal life during this period has had a pretty sharp uptick. Married to a beautiful woman for over a year, the doting father of two fur babies. I'm not going to lie, Milos. I never pictured that to be a role that that you would embrace. I mean, that can help your perspective, but during the time that you weren't on court, when coming back might have seemed off the table, what did you do all day? Like, tell me you didn't take up golf or pickleball or something.
Well, pickleball, no. I'm still on the other side of the argument on that one. I did take up golf because it was the only thing I could do. I was supposed to walk a lot, and I'm not the kind of person that's going to walk in circles. So I decided to play golf. I started taking university courses, started taking classes in different things, read up a lot, tried really to meet people, to try to see what life might look like after tennis. And then at the same time, yeah, my life did change. My wife, she's incredibly supportive and puts up with a lot of me and a lot of my idiosyncrasies, but she's always there trying to kind of help me through every step of the way, tennis specific, and also as much about the things away from tennis. So that was always nice. And then, you know, you can find ways to keep busy. It was just hard to find some things always that you kind of absorb you as much as a goal in tennis, right? Because it's not just a mental thing, it's a physical aspect of it. So I could go and study for 4 or 5 hours about something, but since you don't come a step away with it, I guess with a physical kind of level of fatigue, it doesn't feel like you put in the same time and effort. So I had to kind of get used to that kind of different recalibration and sense of like, okay, I did do something today, something that I feel might help me down the road. And that was something that I took time to get used to, but I think I made good progress with it.
I mean, that's the biggest challenge for any athlete, really. That it's almost impossible to find that same buzz, that same passion and Jones for something else, and yet you may have another 60 years to live. And
No, you have a whole other life after
yeah,
tennis, you could say, right? You could say tennis is, you have to, if you don't, the one thing I learned is if you don't take the time to try to create that life for yourself, you can end up falling into a cycle where you're a lot more reactive to things, and you might not end up doing the things you really enjoy. And you just end up kind of following a rhythm that you just never got out of. And I think that became kind of a phobia for me, is like, who knows when I step away from tennis, what things will look like. But I want to take the time to learn other skills. If I come back to tennis, I want it to be that I come back to tennis because I miss it and that's where I want to be, and I can find like that role for me that I can contribute. Not because I didn't take the time to learn something else. I think it's easy just to go back on tour and maybe I don't think you can be a good coach or even a great coach if you want it to be without really enjoying it and that kind of stuff. And I think there's unfortunately a lot of people that are just around to be around because it's the one thing they've known their whole life. And that's kind of been a bit of a cautionary tale for me, that a route that I wouldn't want to go down.
well, given that you sort of said you basically retired in your soul, at some point, but hadn't told anybody, and you can't sit around the rest of your life counting your money every day. To the extent that you did sketch out your future, what direction do you think it might take when the time comes?
I think, well, I've just refused to answer that question.
Okay.
And the reason being is, one thing I did enjoy the most was the time away and just doing things kind of for me without answering questions about it. And the way, when I was trying to understand why I enjoyed it, from the age of 20, everybody's always asked me every day about tennis. Nope. And how few people probably asked me from the age of 8 to 19, right? When you're not at the top level of tennis or that kind of thing. And you have to put in that time, because the success I've had from 20 on doesn't happen without those 12 years of effort put in as a kid, for myself, for my family, from the coaches around me, from the people. So I really do believe that you have to put in the effort, and it's kind of good to go away from it, because if you are putting up an expectation for something, you end up chasing something that might be rewarding right away, rather than building something that might last you for the rest of your life, or you might find something. And I think that's why I've kind of stayed. because I've seen a lot, you can look around and you can see a lot of athletes that go into doing something or say they're going to do something and kind of use that tennis as a springboard or whatever sport it may be as a springboard, and they end up doing something, but they struggle to find lasting success because they don't build into something. They just think that, hey, I was a good athlete, I will be a good whatever the next thing is. And it doesn't just work that way, because you have to put in the time, you have to, give it due respect, and you have to make the effort. And I just don't want to get it caught in that trap or that assumption that, hey, I played tennis well, that must mean I know the answers to everything in life, which it's far away from that. You kind of got to figure out the things, and there's too many other people around making that effort that you got to play catch up with, because most people start that quest at 20, 22, 23, 24, whenever it may be. Some started it as teenagers. So whatever the different thing might be, I know I want to put in the time, but I also want to put it in away from everything so I can do it kind of like what worked for me in tennis.
Yeah. Are your parents excited about you playing in Toronto? It's been 5 years. I hadn't realized it had been that long.
Yeah, 5 years. I think they are, but my parents, kind of like me, aren't the people that will tell you they're excited about something. Like for me, I would probably say for me, it's a big excitement because that was one of the big things, COVID, with everything there. My parents weren't able to be there for any of those matches that I got to play before I got hurt. And my dad was supposed to come, had an unfortunate thing with actually just travel with flights getting canceled, so didn't make it to Wimbledon.
Oh,
That both of them will be there. That will probably be the thing that I'm most emotional about, because my parents have never been directly involved in my tennis, but they've been involved with everything around my tennis to make things as possible as they've been for me. And I think it means as much to them as it means to me, but I can only talk on my own perspective, and it means a lot.
all right. Finally, for the millions of people out there who struggle with this, putting aside the fact that it's a lot easier for dudes to knock off weight, a lot of times it's just a matter of cutting out the beer and the late night snacks, which is not necessarily obviously the case with you. But how did you take off 40 pounds so quickly, while still needing calories and everything to train and do everything that you wanted to do?
Yeah, I tried that for a long period. Most of my injuries have been lower body, so I knew something needed, or at least to give my best self the best chance. I ate one steak a day for about 4 or 5 weeks. I would not recommend it to anybody. I don't think it's a smart thing. There was a lot of parts of it that I didn't enjoy, but I was well aware that if I wanted to have an opportunity to come by, I needed to go through something, and I was, I guess I was willing to do it, and I knew I lost muscle during that time for sure. Was there any measurement of it? I don't know, but I knew I could always build muscle easier than I could go the other way. So I said, okay, let's give a complete reset and I'll build myself up. This was all the way in January. So I knew I had the time to get things right once I knew I wasn't going to play Indian Wells in Miami. And I was out for Australian Open. So, I had to have kind of my back up against the wall and kind of make that decision. And it wasn't advised to me by anybody, and it's not advice by any means, but it's kind of what got me there, and I sucked it up and tried to make the most of it.
Good steak, I hope.
A very good steak, but not, a very good steak after 5 days in a row of doing it doesn't taste very good.
That's great. Thanks, Milos, and we'll see you in Toronto.
See you in Toronto.